Snow fell softly outside the dining room windows, covering the quiet Colorado ranch in white. Inside, the warmth of Christmas lights reflected off crystal glasses and polished silverware. The smell of rosemary turkey and cinnamon rolls filled the air, and at the head of the table sat 72-year-old Eleanor Whitmore, alone, not physically. Emotionally, because even surrounded by family, Eleanor hadn't truly belonged there in years. Her son Daniel barely looked at her anymore. Her grandchildren spent dinner staring at iPads, and her daughter-in-law, Vanessa, treated Eleanor like an inconvenient relic nobody had the courage to throw away. Still, Eleanor smiled politely, because mothers learn how to survive heartbreak quietly. "Mom, pass the gravy?" Daniel asked absent-mindedly, never lifting his eyes from his phone. "Of course, sweetheart." Her hands trembled slightly as she reached across the table. Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Careful," she muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "We don't need another accident this year." The room went silent for a second. Eleanor froze. Last Christmas, she dropped a wine glass after arthritis pain shot through her fingers. Vanessa had complained about it for weeks. Eleanor forced a smile. "I'm steady enough," she whispered. Vanessa gave a fake laugh and sipped her wine. "You know, Daniel," she said, leaning back in her chair, "we really should have booked that Aspen Lodge instead of hosting here." Daniel frowned slightly. "Mom wanted Christmas at the ranch." Vanessa shrugged. "Exactly." The word landed like a slap. Eleanor lowered her eyes to her plate. For 43 years, she and her late husband Walter had built this ranch from nothing. They'd survived droughts, debt, miscarriages, blizzards, and cancer treatments inside these walls. This ranch wasn't just property, it was their life. But to Vanessa, it was old furniture with emotional attachments. Dinner continued awkwardly, then came dessert. Vanessa stood holding her wine glass. "Oh, before gifts," she announced brightly, "I just want to say something." Daniel smiled nervously. Eleanor looked up. Vanessa grinned. "I think next year we should finally make some changes around here." Nobody spoke. Vanessa continued casually. "I mean, no offense, Eleanor, but this house is becoming too much responsibility for everyone." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Vanessa took another sip. And honestly, she laughed lightly. "We can't keep organizing our lives around a burden." Silence cleaved silence. The word echoed across the dining room. Burden. Daniel looked down immediately. Didn't defend her, didn't object, didn't say a word. That hurt more than Vanessa's cruelty ever could. Eleanor stared at her son waiting, begging silently. "Please say something." But he didn't. Her grandson Tyler awkwardly cleared his throat. Her granddaughter Emma looked horrified. Vanessa kept talking. "I'm just being practical. At some point, assisted living makes more sense for everyone." Eleanor felt something inside her crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, the way old ice breaks beneath heavy snow. She nodded once slowly, then stood up. "I think I'm tired," she whispered. Daniel finally looked at her. "Mom, Merry Christmas," Eleanor said softly, and she walked upstairs alone. That night, Eleanor sat awake beside the bedroom window Walter once built with his own hands. Snow drifted across the fields outside. She remembered being 23 years old, dancing barefoot in this very room while Walter played old country records. She remembered Daniel as a little boy, running through the barn with scraped knees and freckles. She remembered love, real love, the kind that made sacrifices feel small. And suddenly, she realized something devastating. Her family didn't see her as a mother anymore, only as an obstacle standing between them and the future they wanted. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks, but around 3 a.m., the crying stopped, and something else took its place: clarity. The next morning, Eleanor woke before sunrise, calm, composed, certain. She dressed carefully in a dark green sweater Walter once loved. Then she made coffee and called someone. By noon, a black SUV pulled into the ranch driveway. Vanessa peeked through the curtains. "Who's that?" Daniel frowned. "No idea." A tall man stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. Eleanor opened the front door before he knocked. "Good morning, Richard." "Morning, Mrs. Whitmore." Vanessa immediately stiffened. "Wait, Richard Hale?" Daniel blinked in confusion. The man nodded politely. Richard Hale wasn't just any attorney. He was one of the most powerful real estate lawyers in the state. Vanessa suddenly looked nervous, very nervous. The three of them sat in the living room while snow fell outside. Richard calmly opened his briefcase, then placed several documents on the table. Daniel looked confused. "Mom, what's this?" Eleanor folded her hands peacefully. "I finalized the sale this morning." Vanessa frowned. "What sale?" Eleanor looked directly at her. "The ranch." Silence. Daniel stared at her. "What?" "The Whitmore Ranch was purchased by Aspen Horizon Resorts." Vanessa laughed nervously. "Okay, that's not funny." Richard slid the paperwork forward. "It closed at 8:42 this morning." Daniel's face went pale. "How much?" Richard adjusted his glasses. $90 million. The room exploded into silence. Vanessa physically stopped breathing for a second. Daniel stared at his mother like he'd never seen her before. "90?" Eleanor nodded calmly. "The mineral rights alone were worth more than anyone realized. Walter discovered it years ago." Vanessa's entire personality changed instantly. "Oh my God, Eleanor." Her voice suddenly sweetened. "You never told us." Eleanor smiled faintly. "You never asked." Daniel sat down heavily. "Mom, this changes everything." "No," Eleanor replied softly. "It reveals everything." Vanessa forced a laugh. "Well, obviously we don't want you going anywhere now." Eleanor looked at her quietly. The humiliation from Christmas dinner still hung in the air like smoke. "A burden doesn't usually get invited to stay," Eleanor said gently. Vanessa's face drained of color. "Eleanor, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." For the first time in years, Eleanor's voice carried strength, not anger. "Strength. You said exactly what you believed." Daniel stepped forward desperately. "Mom, please." "No." He stopped cold. Eleanor stood slowly. "I spent years making excuses for both of you." Her eyes filled with tears. "But last night I realized something." She looked directly at her son. When a woman spends her whole life loving people who only tolerate her, eventually she has to choose herself. Daniel's eyes watered instantly. "Mom, I buried my husband in that field," Eleanor whispered. "I held your hand through fevers, heartbreaks, nights, nightmares. I gave you everything I had." She glanced toward Vanessa, and somehow I still became an inconvenience. Vanessa started crying. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "I'm not angry anymore." That somehow hurt them more, because rage can be fought. Peace cannot. Richard cleared his throat gently. "Mrs. Whitmore also established a trust this morning." Daniel looked hopeful again. "A trust?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes." Vanessa leaned forward eagerly. Eleanor continued calmly. "Half the money goes to children's cancer hospitals across Colorado." Vanessa's smile disappeared slightly. The other half funds housing for elderly widows abandoned by their families. Daniel looked shattered. And then came the final blow. "As for you two," Eleanor smiled sadly, "you get nothing." The silence afterward felt enormous. Vanessa suddenly panicked. "Eleanor, please. We are family." Eleanor looked at her carefully. "No," she said softly. "Family doesn't call love a burden." Daniel broke down first. Real tears, the kind Eleanor hadn't seen since he was a child. "I'm sorry," he whispered, and for one terrible second, Eleanor almost collapsed into old instincts: forgive, protect, excuse. But then she remembered crying alone upstairs on Christmas night while laughter continued downstairs without her. She remembered waiting for her son to defend her, waiting, hoping, begging silently. And she realized something painful. Some apologies arrive only after consequences. Richard handed Eleanor her coat. The movers would arrive in 2 days. The ranch would officially transfer ownership after New Year's. Eleanor walked slowly toward the front door. Daniel followed desperately. "Mom, please, where will you go?" Eleanor smiled softly. "For the first time in years." She looked out at the falling snow. "Somewhere peaceful." Then she paused. "One more thing." Daniel looked up hopefully. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Tell your children I loved them enough to leave before they learned this behavior from you." And with that, she walked into the snow. Weeks later, a photo appeared online. Eleanor stood beside a fireplace in a beautiful mountain lodge surrounded by elderly women laughing over hot chocolate. Not one of them looked lonely. The caption beneath the photo read, "We were called burdens once too." The post went viral overnight. Millions shared it, thousands commented. But one comment gained more attention than all the others. It came from Daniel. "I traded my mother's dignity for comfort. I will regret that for the rest of my life." People expected Eleanor to respond. She never did. Because some wounds don't need revenge, just distance. And somewhere high in the Colorado mountains, while snow covered the earth in white again, Eleanor Whitmore finally experienced something richer than $90 million. Peace continued. 3 months later, spring arrived in the Rockies. Snow melted from the mountainsides. The old Whitmore ranch was gone. Construction crews had already torn down the west barn Walter built by hand. Luxury resort signs stood where wild horses once ran, and every single morning, Daniel Whitmore drove past it on his way to work, punishing himself because regret is strange. It doesn't scream at you all at once. It whispers constantly at red lights, in empty kitchens, in silence after phone calls that never come anymore. At first, Daniel convinced himself Eleanor just needed space. "A few weeks," he told Vanessa. "She'll calm down." But weeks became months. No calls, no visits, no birthday cards, nothing. And slowly, the house began falling apart, not physically, emotionally, because Eleanor had been the invisible glue, holding everything together. Without her, the warmth disappeared. Tyler stopped coming downstairs for dinner. Emma barely spoke to Vanessa anymore. Even holidays felt awkward now. One night, Vanessa burned dinner and snapped at Emma for ordering takeout. Emma exploded. "Stop pretending Grandma was the problem." The room froze. Vanessa stared at her. "What did you say?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "You humiliated her." "That's enough," Vanessa snapped. "No," Emma shouted. "You called her a burden like she was trash." Daniel closed his eyes, because hearing the words out loud made them uglier, realer. Emma grabbed her backpack. "She loved us more than either of you ever noticed." Then she walked out. The front door slammed so hard the family portrait near the hallway tilted sideways. The same portrait Eleanor used to dust every Sunday morning. Daniel stared at it for a long time, then quietly straightened it. Later that night, he entered his mother's old bedroom for the first time since Christmas. Everything was gone. Only pale rectangles remained where photographs once hung. But inside the closet, he found one small box. His hands trembled opening it. Inside were dozens of old birthday cards, school drawings, report cards, Father's Day crafts, every tiny, meaningless thing he'd ever given her, saved, protected, loved. Daniel sat on the floor crying harder than he had at Walter's funeral. Because suddenly he understood something horrifying. His mother treasured scraps from his childhood, while he couldn't even defend her at dinner. Meanwhile, Eleanor's new life quietly flourished. The mountain lodge she funded had become something extraordinary, not a facility, a home. Women from across the state arrived carrying grief, abandonment, and loneliness. Widows, retired teachers, former nurses, grandmothers forgotten after raising entire families. Eleanor listened to them all, and every time one woman whispered, "I feel like a burden," Eleanor would gently take her hand and say, "No, dear. You were simply surrounded by people too selfish to recognize your value." The women began calling her the Christmas Angel. News stations picked up the story, then podcasts, then national interviews. Millions connected with her story because deep down, everyone fears becoming unwanted someday. But Eleanor never mentioned Daniel publicly, not once. She protected him even after everything. That was the cruelest part. One rainy afternoon in April, Daniel finally gathered enough courage to drive to the lodge. The building overlooked a peaceful lake surrounded by pine trees. Warm light glowed through enormous windows. For a moment, he saw his mother laughing inside, actually laughing, not the polite, exhausted smile she wore at the ranch, real joy, and it destroyed him. He sat in his car for 20 minutes trying to breathe. Finally, he walked to the front door. A young receptionist greeted him kindly. "Can I help you?" Daniel swallowed hard. I'm here to see Eleanor Whitmore. The woman's smile softened immediately. Oh, that single word carried recognition, judgment, pity. She's in the garden. Daniel nodded weakly. He found her near the lake, planting tulips with two elderly women beside her. Eleanor looked smaller somehow, softer. Peaceful. When she noticed Daniel standing there, her hands stopped moving. The other women quietly walked away. Neither spoke for several seconds. Birds chirped softly nearby. Wind moved through the trees. Finally, Daniel whispered, "You look happy." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I am. That hurt more than anger ever could." Daniel's eyes filled instantly. "I deserve that." Eleanor slowly removed her gardening gloves. "You didn't come all this way to punish yourself, Daniel." His voice cracked. "I came because I can't sleep anymore." Eleanor stayed silent. "I keep hearing that night in my head," he admitted. Over and over. Tears rolled down his face, and the worst part is, he looked away in shame. She was right. Eleanor frowned slightly. "I let you become a burden," he whispered. "You carried everyone, Dad, me, the kids, the house. Everything." He broke completely, and I stood there while someone made you feel small. Eleanor's eyes watered too now, because this wasn't manipulation anymore. This was grief. Real grief. Daniel sank onto the nearby bench. "I don't even know when I became that kind of man." Eleanor sat beside him quietly. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she said softly, "Pain doesn't usually arrive all at once, Daniel." He looked at her. "It happens slowly." She stared across the lake. One ignored phone call, one interrupted conversation, one holiday where love becomes obligation instead of gratitude. Her voice trembled. And one day, someone who gave you their whole life suddenly feels unwelcome in their own home. Daniel covered his face, crying, "I'm sorry." Eleanor finally took his hand, not because he earned forgiveness, but because she was still his mother. "You know what the hardest part was?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head. "I could survive Vanessa's cruelty." Her eyes filled with tears. "But not your silence." That sentence shattered him completely. Back at the house, Vanessa's world was unraveling too. Friends stopped calling after the viral story spread. People recognized her at stores. Online comments destroyed her reputation. Even worse, Emma had moved into a college dorm early and barely spoke to her anymore. One evening, Vanessa sat alone, scrolling through social media. Everywhere she looked, people praised Eleanor, the grandmother America needed. A symbol of dignity, a lesson in self-worth. Vanessa suddenly threw her phone across the room because for the first time in her life, she realized money couldn't repair character and status couldn't erase shame. A week later, Eleanor received a handwritten letter, not from Daniel, from Emma. "Grandma, I still hear your laugh when I make pancakes. I still fold napkins the way you taught me. I still miss you every single day. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I was scared of conflict. But you taught me something important. Good people become lonely when everyone else stays quiet. I don't want to be quiet anymore. I love you." Eleanor cried reading it, then smiled because cycles can break. Pain doesn't always pass downward forever. Sometimes, one brave person stops it. The summer, Eleanor's lodge expanded into 3 locations. Donations poured in from around the country, but Eleanor never cared much about the money. Her favorite moments were smaller. Morning coffee with widows who laughed again, birthday parties for forgotten grandmothers, watching lonely women become sisters. One evening, while sunset painted the mountains gold, Eleanor stood alone near the lake. Daniel approached quietly. This time, she didn't look surprised. He handed her a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked. Daniel smiled sadly. "I rebuilt something." Inside the box sat a tiny carved replica of Walter's old barn, handmade, imperfect, beautiful. Daniel swallowed hard. "I remembered helping Dad build the original." Eleanor ran trembling fingers across the wood, and for the first time since Christmas. She hugged her son. Daniel cried against her shoulder like a little boy. But Eleanor whispered something important into his ear. "This is not forgiveness all at once." Daniel nodded through tears. "I know. It's a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings are harder than endings. but they matter more. Far away, construction crews continued transforming the Whitmore Ranch into a luxury destination for wealthy tourists. Yet strangely, the place never felt warm again. Locals said the land had changed, as if something sacred had left with Eleanor. Maybe it had, because homes are never built from wood alone. They are built from love. And once love leaves, even mansions become empty.